You were never supposed to be here. Not in the way motivational speakers mean it. In the literal, biological, statistical sense. The ancestors who made you were small, slow, mostly hairless, armed with nothing sharper than a sharpened rock, and surrounded on every side by animals that could kill them without effort. Cave lions the size of small cars, giant hyenas that could crush bone with a single bite, short-faced bears that stood nearly 4 meters tall when they rose on their hind legs, sabre-toothed cats with canine teeth longer than your hand. And yet, here you are. How? That is the question that has puzzled evolutionary biologists, paleoanthropologists, and archaeologists for over a century. How did a creature with no claws, no armor, no venom, no real speed, and no natural camouflage not only survive in a world packed with apex predators, but eventually displace nearly all of them? The answer is not what you think. It is not simply that humans were clever. Every assumption you carry into this video about why humans survived is probably missing the deepest and most unsettling part of the story. And the deeper you go into it, the stranger it gets. If you want to keep exploring questions like this one, questions about where we came from, what we really are, and what the evidence actually says, subscribe to Whyverse. This is exactly what we do here. First, you need to understand what the world actually looked like during the period most critical to human survival. Roughly between 300,000 and 50,000 years ago, the era when anatomically modern humans began spreading out of Africa and across the planet. Think of it less like a nature documentary and more like a horror film with no exits. Africa alone hosted lions significantly larger than any alive today. Leopards competed with humans for the same cave shelters, dragging prey into trees to keep it away from rivals that included early Homo sapiens. On the open savanna, short-faced hyenas outweighed modern hyenas by nearly double and hunted in packs. In Europe, cave bears were not the docile creatures their name implies. They were enormous, territorial, and they wanted the same caves humans needed to survive winter. In Asia, the picture was no better. Giant pangolins, cave hyenas, and tigers far larger than today's Bengal tigers patrolled the same landscapes that early human groups were slowly crossing. Here is the key detail most people miss when they imagine early humans as hunted prey. Humans were not simply at the bottom of the food chain. They occupied an unstable, dangerous middle position, dangerous enough to be worth hunting, not dangerous enough to be left alone. Something like a mid-tier predator, occasionally a threat, frequently a meal. That is the starting point. That is what human ancestors woke up to every single morning. But that is only the surface, because the deeper you go into the actual strategies that kept early humans alive, the stranger and more surprising the story becomes. Most people assume that human survival came down to one thing: the brain, intelligence, the idea that humans simply outthought their predators, that superior reasoning compensated for physical weakness. It is a flattering story. It is also dangerously incomplete. The easy answer is tools, spears and fire and traps and strategy. And yes, these mattered enormously. But here is the problem with that explanation. The oldest confirmed spear hafts are around 300,000 years old. Controlled fire may go back 400,000 years or more. Yet the predators surrounding early humans had already been perfecting their killing strategies for millions of years. A lion that has been an apex predator for 5 million years does not suddenly become manageable because a new species has learned to hold a pointed stick. So what actually happened? The real answer, the one that changes how you understand human survival, is group behavior, not intelligence in isolation. Not tools in isolation, but the specific way human social groups functioned under extreme predator pressure. Unlike almost any other prey animal on the planet, early humans did not simply flee from predators. They developed coordinated, communicative, flexible responses. They could share information across time, warning each other about threats they had not personally witnessed. They could plan future defensive actions. They could sustain complex group cohesion even under sustained stress. Early humans were not the strongest animal in any ecosystem they entered. They were the most collectively capable. The difference sounds minor. It was the difference between extinction and survival, and this is where the story starts to get genuinely strange. Because when researchers began studying which specific group behaviors mattered most, they found an answer that nobody expected. Stop. Because what comes next contradicts what most researchers believed for decades. For most of the 20th century, the scientific consensus held that early humans were primarily prey animals who slowly, gradually, became hunters. The default image was one of cowering, scavenging hominids, skulking at the edges of predator kills, grabbing scraps when the lions moved off, humans as victims, not actors. Then the fossil record started telling a different story. Isotopic analysis of early human bones, the chemical signatures locked inside ancient remains, began revealing something uncomfortable. In multiple regions and across multiple time periods, early Homo sapiens and their close relatives were not primarily eating plant material supplemented by occasional scavenged meat. They were eating large amounts of animal protein, not scavenged protein, hunted protein. The bones of megafauna, enormous prey animals, showed cut marks made by stone tools placed before the gnaw marks of hyenas and other scavengers. Humans were getting to these carcasses first, not arriving after the predators had finished, arriving before them. This flipped the story entirely. Early humans were not just surviving predator pressure. In many documented contexts, they were actively competing with apex predators for the same prey. They were not at the mercy of the food chain. They were, in certain situations, sitting at the top of it, or fighting to get there, which raises a question that reconnects directly back to what we started with. If early humans were capable of hunting large prey, why were they still being killed and eaten by predators at all? What was the specific failure point? The vulnerability that kept them in danger even as their capabilities grew. And here is what almost no one talks about when the subject of human survival comes up. The most dangerous moment for any early human was not the open savanna at midday. It was the transition, the threshold moments, dawn and dusk, the movement between shelter and hunting ground, the crossing of open ground between tree cover, the moment of sleep. These are the windows where the fossil and archaeological record shows the highest concentration of predator on human violence, and they reveal the deepest truth about how human survival strategies actually evolved. Early humans did not solve the predator problem. They managed it continuously, with layered strategies that evolved together rather than in sequence. Fire was not simply a tool for warmth or cooking. The evidence now strongly suggests that fire functioned primarily as a predator deterrent at night, the single most dangerous period for a slow, relatively night-blind primate in a world full of nocturnal hunters. Cave sites across Africa, Europe, and Asia show repeated, sustained fire use at cave mouths, not inside the caves for warmth. At the entrance, a burning perimeter, a boundary that said to every saber-toothed cat and cave hyena approaching in the dark, the cost of entering is too high. The next layer of strategy was even more sophisticated, and it took researchers decades to accept it as a deliberate behavior rather than coincidence. Early humans actively tracked predator movement patterns and organized their own routines around them. The evidence for this comes from spatial archaeology, the relationship between human occupation sites and the territories of known predator species. Humans were not choosing shelters randomly. They were choosing shelters in ways that minimized territorial overlap with the most dangerous local predators. While maintaining access to the prey, those predators also hunted. They were reading the landscape, mapping invisible lines between danger and safety, and doing it collectively, sharing this spatial knowledge across generations, encoding it in behavior and eventually in early symbolic communication. Here is the detail that makes this genuinely moving when you sit with it. These were not abstract strategic thinkers in any modern sense. They were people who were frightened, who grieved their dead, who watched children be taken by predators, and who found ways to keep going anyway. Every fire lit at a cave mouth was an act of collective intelligence that someone, somewhere, paid for with their life before it became standard practice. But none of that fully answers the original question. The real answer is both simpler and far more unsettling. Here is what actually happened to the apex predators that once hunted human ancestors. They are almost all gone, not because of climate change alone, not because of disease. The megafauna extinctions, the disappearance of cave lions, saber-toothed cats, giant hyenas, cave bears, short-faced bears, correlate with extraordinary precision to the arrival of human populations in each region. Africa, which had the longest exposure to evolving humans, retained the most megafauna because its species had millions of years to develop wariness of human behavior. Every other continent that humans entered, Europe, Asia, the Americas, Australia, experienced rapid, catastrophic losses of large predator and prey species within a geologically short window of human arrival. The creature that was never supposed to survive had not simply survived. It had become the most dangerous animal in every ecosystem it entered, not because it had claws or venom or speed, because it had something none of the apex predators had: the ability to cooperate across time, to teach, to plan across seasons, to hold a grudge against an entire species and pursue it across generations. Go back to that image from the beginning. A small, hairless primate surrounded by things designed to kill it. That image is true, but it is also the first chapter of a story whose ending was never guaranteed, and whose mechanism was never simply intelligence or tools or strength, but something rarer and stranger: the capacity to turn shared fear into shared strategy, the ability to make the darkness survivable, not alone, but together. You carry all of this inside you, not as metaphor, as biology. Your instinctive discomfort in open spaces at night, that is not irrational anxiety. It is 400,000 years of accurate threat assessment written into your nervous system. Your pull toward firelight in darkness, your deep need for social connection under stress, your ability to feel fear on behalf of someone you have never met, simply by hearing their story. All of it is the inheritance of ancestors who survived the unsurvivable by refusing to face it alone. The predators changed, the strategies adapted, but the core human response to an overwhelming world has remained remarkably constant across deep time. Find the others, build the fire, share what you know, stay until morning. Every time you feel that pull, toward community, toward warmth, toward the people who know what you know, you are running the same ancient software that kept your ancestors alive in a world that should have swallowed them whole. You were never supposed to be here. And yet somehow, across every catastrophe and every darkness and every predator that evolution could design, the line held. It held because of cooperation, not just cleverness. It held because of people who chose to survive together rather than die alone. Which raises a question worth sitting with. In a world that no longer has saber-toothed cats, what are we still surviving together from? And what does that mean for who we become next? If that question stays with you, Yverse is where we keep pulling the thread. Subscribe. The next layer of the story is already waiting. Thanks for watching and see you in our next video.